And in that respect, also giving the opportunity to focus on diversity and inclusion as well. A moment. Oh, I have to admit something. I don't know where I'm at. Oh, there we are. So ED2 started this task force on diversity and inclusion beginning this year, maybe end of last year already. And because there was a call also by the members to have a focus in 2021 on diversity and inclusion, as all are challenged by this, but also have good practices on this. So ED2 members are typical that they have a dedicated task in organizing education for disadvantaged groups of students and offering them easy, accessible learning paths by online flexible modes of teaching. Open universities, by definition, are inclusive, innovative, and responsive. That is already from the start of the task of the open universities, and represent therefore also a lot of good examples, but also strategies and policies in diversity and inclusion. As we are representing a great variety of these, I think, Stefan, are you using? I don't know
I'm muted, I think, but I'm not sure what the noise is.
No, I can't shift my slides. That's the noise. Okay, I will use that. So we had the initiative of bringing all the experts together from ED2 and who are interested in giving a 1 year's focus on this topic. And immediately we have 17 universities that signed up for this task force from 15 different countries. So it promises to become a very rich collection of approaches to diversity and inclusion within ED2. And the main questions that we put forward for ourselves is, first of all, what does it mean? And what are the target groups and their needs? We want to make an inventory of examples of good practices. We want inventory of existing institutional strategies. And our main goal is also to make a reference model for universities European-wide to adopt as a model for institutional approaches for supporting diversity and inclusion. When we had the first meeting of this task force, it became immediately clear that we are not talking about one group, of course. We are talking about a diversity of groups. So we set up several sub-themes and subgroups. So currently we have within our task force split up the group into focus on gender, migrants, ethnicity, specific learning disabilities, functional disabilities, prisoners, athletes, artists, and army staff. They all have require different approaches to offer them accessibility to education. A common focus is for all these groups and other in general is that we focus on social inclusion, but also digital accessibility. So on all these groups, we had separate meetings and hope to come to a report addressing all these by the end of this year. I just show you here what we presented also in our General Assembly. So that's broader than our task force. And I think it's a question most universities have to ask themselves. What is our general framework for diversity and inclusion? And do we have specific programs for specific target groups? And then also, is the technology currently developing and the innovation in education improving diversity and inclusion measures? How can we take these opportunities offered? As well as if you have strategies in place, did the COVID crisis in the past year hamper diversity and inclusion? So these are questions we give to our members to also put forward into their own institutional discussion. Coming now to the program of today. First, we want to start with Lotna Hassan from Tampere University on accessible educational games. And that will be followed by a presentation of Israel Reyes from the WOC in Catalonia on the lived experience with disabilities during the COVID crisis. So most relevant and interesting contributions for this afternoon. I would like to give the floor to Lotna to present the first presentation. And I'm stop sharing here.
All right, thank you, George. And Yeah, it's shared. Great, excellent. Full screen. So, yeah, no, just it happens a lot. Okay, again. All right, but so welcome everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak today on educational games and their accessibility. I am Lobna Hassan. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the Center of Excellence in Game Culture Studies, which is at Tampere University in Finland. And I'm also associated with Hanken School of Economics. And that this is where I got my PhD a few years ago. And before that, I was studying in Cairo, Egypt, which is where I'm from. And that's where I got my bachelor's and master's. My research mainly has been about games and accessibility of games and connected applications such as gamification and educational games and so on. You here can see my contacts and website if you want to read more and know more about what I'm doing. But to kickstart this session, and it's always the Zoom setting is a bit hard when it comes to audience interaction. So I'm not going to ask for that. You can keep your cameras off if you don't want to open them. But you can use the chat if you would like to. And my first question is, you're walking and you come across this. There are stairs and electric escalators. Which one do you take? And usually the answer would be that people are going to take the escalator. And I know this because this photo specifically comes from an ad to encourage people to take the stairs, because it is the healthiest choice and it contributes to your well-being and so on. And my next quick question is about audiobooks. So how many in the audience use audiobooks or have heard them, use them in something before? If you have, just say yes or +1 in the chat or something like this. I'm assuming this number, I'm a very avid user of audiobooks. They're very nice when you're cooking or cleaning or doing something. And in fact, one of the statistics we have from the US is that 1 in 5 Americans listen to audiobooks. So I couldn't find statistics from Europe, but we can imagine similar numbers. So audiobooks have emerged and become this thing that a lot of people use in order to read more books annually, and instead of maybe not having, when they don't have enough time to sit down and properly read a book. And these two examples that I've talked about, as you have guessed, these are things that emerged from accessibility research, not just from it. It's of course larger question on how to make life easier, but these technologies were facilitated because of our work towards accessibility. And they show us something called the curb cut effect, which is basically that when we try to make one thing accessible for a group of people, it usually ends out benefiting everyone else in society. And this term, the curb cut effect, specifically comes from that so many years ago, tens of years ago, most European capitals started building these curbs in their streets. And the point of building them was basically so that people using wheelchairs would have equal access to all cities and would be equal to everyone else. And so this might seem like an easy task, but it's actually rocket science. Like there is a lot of calculations that need to go into how to make this seemingly simple cut in the pavement. It's actually not simple at all. But then after governments invested all of this time and effort, which was not light, we ended up with a situation where everyone was actually using these ramps because they just make life easier. So this is a person, he doesn't appear to have a disability. We don't know if he does or not, but he's at least using this curb, not because of being on a wheelchair, but just because he's carrying or pulling something heavy. And so this is essentially the curb cut effect and why accessibility of almost anything is important. It's simply put, accessibility just makes the most usable things that come to the benefit of everyone. So the hard work that goes into it ends up paying off and benefiting everyone in society. And it especially benefits around 1 billion people with disabilities. There is a figure that includes people with different kinds of disabilities. And what we know is that this number is gonna continue increasing because of things like just people normally being born with a disability, or aging, war, unrest, all that kind of stuff. So in fact, some people say that anyone is prone to developing a disability, but it's kind of, that's maybe a bit dark, but it is sort of the reality of life. So what is important to note here is that when it comes to educational sectors, not a lot of people with disabilities come up and say, hey, I have a disability, I need some sort of an accommodation from you, I need you to help me with something. That doesn't happen a lot. Most disabilities in educational sectors remain invisible unless people ask for these accommodations, and they don't ask for them because they're often seen as illegal shortcuts. So if you think about a person with a visual disability and they need, for example, more time to take their tests or something like that, usually educators respond by, oh, you want something, an advantage over your peers. So that is a stigma that is there, and it's behind why a lot of people with disabilities remain without getting the accommodations that they need. Another issue is that disabilities drift, which is, that's a very difficult word for me to understand, but it basically means that when someone comes out and says, I have an X type of disability, I'm dyslexic, I have a hearing disability or something, some educators go on to assume that this person is just disabled in every kind of way and that it's sort of impossible to deal with them. Which is, in fact, it's not true. They have a challenge with one thing. So if we just address that one thing or try to help them with it, then this is actually a very valuable member of society. And actually, this is a news from 2021, so from this year, and it talks about the UK surveillance agency hiring mainly people with dyslexia. And this is because they see the world differently. So they tend to not focus on the details of things. They see the larger picture more easily than other people, which then helps with different tasks than other people would be doing. So in a way, we need people with different kind of disabilities. This is why it is actually framed as different abilities, although this some people don't like this term, but this is why we should be investing in accessibility, not just because we need people with disabilities in different situations, but also it also helps everyone in the society. And so we go back to the issue of that people with disabilities remain underrepresented, so we don't really know their needs and what they're after, and they tend to be treated as a homogeneous group. So my hope from this presentation is that somehow I can provide some representation of what students with disabilities might look like, and to leave you with some quick guidelines as to implementing accessibility in your education. And perhaps if I'm starting to go a lot over time, maybe someone can just open their camera and say something, shout at me to go quicker. But so that the challenge of representing people with disabilities is not just in education, it's society-wide. And we tend to see the media fluctuate between seeing people with disabilities as completely reliant on some people and unable to do tasks on their own. So, for example, this photo is accurate in the sense that people with a visual impairment might need the help of someone else and might use a cane. But it's not their only life. This is just one aspect of their life and of their challenge. On the other hand, when the media starts to correct this, it goes to the other extreme of that people with disabilities are superheroes. So this is Daredevil. He's, I think, fully blind, and is just a superhero like Superman or something like that, who saves people, which is that's just the other extreme. It's not fully accurate. And so we need a middle ground of understanding that people with a disability might need some sort of accommodation. They might use a cane or need the help of other people, but they are fully independent and can carry out their life normally. And just a few examples, and I'm focusing on visual disability because you will understand later, but it's a topic that I know a lot about. But for example, we have Molly Burke, who is a fashion YouTuber, and she's fully blind. She lost her sight at 17. However, she likes to dye her hair. Although she doesn't really see her hair, but she remembers what colors look like, and she just likes to do it. She feels pampered when she does it. And so you would look at Molly and you would not think necessarily that this is a blind person because she doesn't look like this. And one of the things about Molly is that she talks a lot about how she hates cooking. And she says that this is just her thing. She doesn't like cooking. It's not because of that she has a visual disability. And we see other people. So for example, this is Tommy Edison. He's also fully blind, if I remember correctly. He has a YouTube channel, and one of the things he does is that he cooks. So just people are different. They have different needs and different way of behaving with their disability. We also have Steve Saylor, who loves video games, although video games are not the most accessible, and we will talk about this in a bit. And then we have me, who is born partially blind, and I don't think this is something that people can easily guess. And but that is just one aspect of a person's personality and should not become the highlight of how they are represented in the media. And so what I wanted to say from these examples is that we don't have a lot of statistics on what people with disabilities at large look like and what their needs are, and they remain underrepresented, and we should somehow do something about this, which is, I think, what all of us here are trying to do. And so when it comes to the question of games, because games are, of course, now a part of everything in life and they are used in education, it becomes a very challenging question because, and this is a hot take, but I'm going to say that most games at large are educational and they teach you something in a way or another. And this is just like a quick summary of some of the things that games can teach you, which is, for example, cognitively, they teach you how to focus on something and to stay with a problem until you actually solve it. They encourage curiosity, and so you become, this transfers to other aspects of life, and generally people who play games are thought to be more curious, or there's some research that points to that. It teaches social skills in terms of like social games where you have to play with others, and sometimes you're the leader, sometimes you're the follower. It teaches you to persist with a problem until it's actually solved, rather than just giving up on trying to beat a monster. You keep fighting the monster until you beat them. And you learn how to manage your emotions between like being frustrated that you can't beat the monster, but then being very happy that you just beat the boss, and just how to regulate all of these ups and downs. And so my hot take is that most games, if not all, are educational, but they're not the most easiest to play, because look at this, like there's so much happening. There is text here on the right hand side that is very small. You have all of these weapons. What is here? Like if I want to click on anything in this area, where is the object that like the objects overlap and it's not very clear how to disentangle them. And then think about someone with color blindness. So this monster is, I'm not sure how they would see it, but it's green and red are not the best color choice for a person with color blindness. And so these are just some of the challenges that games present. And usually when people try to solve them, they go to the other extreme, which is, okay, let's make an accessible game. So let's make an audio game. So this is the first game for the blind on Steam. And the idea is just put on your headphones and listen to the story and interact with just two keys on your keyboard. And like, thank you for making this game, and people do like it and play it. But here's the issue: is this is sort of a way also of excluding people with visual impairments from society, because they don't want to be playing on their own just with their headphones in a cave. They want to interact with other people. And in fact, when I asked, so this was a quick informal survey where I asked people what kind of games they play. This was the answer. So these are people who are fully blind or visually impaired, and they basically play the games that we use, and they use the, like, I'm sure you all know about Duolingo, like this. So they want to be using the things that everyone is using and to be a part of society, like doing the same things. And so we just need to figure out how to accommodate them. So rather than designing something just for them that exclude them, we just need to make them a part of these things. And so I'm not sure if I have time to show this example. But so the idea...
Yeah. There is
Sorry?
time. Yeah. There is time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. But so this is from Animal Crossing, and so this game is not accessible for people with hearing disabilities. It's actually annoying for them. But for people with visual impairments, they need to fish and to wait for the moment. I'm gonna play the video if it's...
Then when the yellow thing sinks down, that's when you need to press A to catch the fish. It's very, very important you learn that. You're gonna have to do it a few times to kind of get used to it, because every time you see the fish poke it, you're gonna want to press A thinking it's caught. But listen to the sounds here quick. Poke. Poke. Catch. See? That little sinking sound, like the bloop, is when you need to catch it. I'm gonna actually show you.
So this is a mainstream game, and it's a small sound. This is just this small addition made it accessible, made the idea of fishing accessible to people with visual impairments. And they love the game because of things like that. So we're talking about very small accommodations that do take time and effort, but they just solve the whole issue. And so this is also how people with visual impairments use computers or play. So you will notice that it's also, there is a lot of variety. So this is a person who's using a special keyboard for Braille, and there are people who's just using regular keyboard, and like this is just an iMac. So this is also part of why disabilities are invisible, because think about this, like now we are talking through Zoom, you have no idea what my setup here looks like. I could be having a device like this behind my camera, which you don't see. And this is why disabilities are invisible, because part of the stigma is that I can orchestrate things in a way that I can hide my disability so that you don't judge me if I show it, and so on. So, and again, what this also image shows is that people have different needs. And what is also good to remember is that sometimes disabilities can cancel each other. So if I make something accessible through audio, like this fishing thing, it becomes inaccessible to people with a hearing disability if, for example, the video is not there. So these two disabilities specifically, they sort of cancel each other out, and so special attention should be like paid to that. If I enable access to something, I don't disable it for something else. And it's also important to note that implementing accessibility should not become the burden of educators, because they are already doing a lot, and it becomes a burden basically when you have to also think about, how do I make this Zoom call accessible, and how do what game do I ask my students to play, and so on. There should be a task force that is dedicated to that to sort of help with it. And so if I will just finally leave some quick guidelines, it's that most importantly, give people their autonomy. So what you've seen in these pictures is that these people are sitting on their own computers, using their own keyboard, using their own software that magnifies or whatever. So this is the most important thing, is allow people the access to whatever you're teaching or the game they're playing or so on. And they, on their devices, are going to figure out a solution most of the time, not always, but sometimes. And so that is like, if I can go back in time and tell my teacher something, it is this. And then basic common sense, like don't use contrast that is annoying like this one, and colors are not the best thing because people are sometimes colorblind, and then the things should be big enough. And so these like guidelines, you would notice that anyone would benefit from them. Like a good font size is good for anyone. And if you want to read more about like more specific guidelines, you can go to this website, and there you will have the disabilities here categorized according to the different types of disabilities. And you can read more about more specific things that you can do if you know you have a student in one of these areas. And I'm also right now doing a literature review on accessibility in games. So if you want the updates on that, I'm putting them on my blog monthly, and you can go to my website and sign up here somewhere in the main page, I think, and you will get a notification when I post a new update. But I'm sorry, I know that I exceeded my time, but thank you. And yeah.
Thanks so much, Donna. No problem in exceeding a bit of your time. It was really interesting and really relevant. And I think it's for some probably also a wake-up call. It starts with the awareness of your target group and their struggles sometimes, and by developing courses or gamification also, immediately think about your target group. So it's about awareness. You need the support of your institution, the technical support, but also the expertise within your institution to be shared, and so that everyone can benefit from this. And also sharing good practices, I think, is really, really important amongst also the universities who are more experienced in that sense, and involve the target group in the development, because the target group only can express the real needs that are there. So thanks so much, Donna. Any questions or remarks to? You can use the chat or take the microphone.
There's some.
Has to be taken into account from the beginning. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's the awareness of your target group, target audience, that you immediately from the start think of that. Yeah, thanks. And maybe later on at the end we have some people come up with further questions or remarks. Thanks so much, Notna. And we'd like to continue now with Israel Hayes from the WOC in Catalonia, fully online university, and he's going to talk about the lived experience of students with disabilities, especially then focusing on the COVID times. Your microphone is muted.
I'm gonna share. Well, good afternoon for everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation and for showing interest in our research. We are working on the inclusion in online education with my supervisor, Dr. Julio Meneses, in collaboration with the support services of the Open University of Catalonia. But today I'm going to talk about the experiences of students with disabilities during the COVID-19 lockdown. Firstly, I'd like to briefly introduce a little bit the context of our university, and I'd like to highlight 3 facts. The first is related to the access, the universalization of access to higher education for everyone who's interested in undertaking higher studies. And this allowed the inclusion of students with disabilities. And about those students, the university now has around 1,700 students with different disabilities, and it makes the university the WOC in Catalonia the first university with most students with disabilities, and in Spain the second university. So I like to talk about the WOC's educational model that is based on e-learning and uses asynchronous interaction among the stakeholders. This educational model is centered on the students, and so the students have learning resources adapted to their needs or to their capabilities, and also a teaching staff that support them when they request some kind of support. Among the teaching staff, I like to highlight, for example, the figure of the work, the role that figure plays on the support for students with disabilities. This is a person that accompanies the student from their enrollment to their graduation. During all the journey, the whole journey of the students in the university. And what about the works student with disabilities profile? We have a diverse type of disabilities in our university, but most of them are students with physical disabilities, with mental disorders, or with sensory disabilities. And most of them are older than 30 years. It means that they are non-traditional students. How the university supports that those students? The university organizes the support for students with disabilities in 3 ways. First of all, there is a support staff comprised by support services, the academic advisor, and instructors. And the resources that the university offers to the student with disability, or to all the students, are, for example, the accessible virtual campus and resources adapted to the learning needs or the learning capabilities of all the students. It means that the university offers, for example, the materials in different formats, so every student can access the learning resources. And finally, the university also promotes reasonable accommodations for students who request those accommodations. And among those accommodations are, for example, the personalized support from the teaching staff, and the accommodation for the continuous assessment, and when it was on-campus examination and the final examination. What about the lockdown and how that situation influenced the student with disabilities performance? As most of us know, the lockdown in Spain started in March in the last year and finished in June in 2020. And that work employs some measures in order to help the student with disability, all the students, in order to cope with the possible difficulties of the lockdown. Those measures are, for example, the flexibilization of time, when the students deliver the assignments, and the adoption of an online final examination, because before the work used on-campus examination. And how did the COVID-19 influence the student with disability performance? For analyzing that situation, we interviewed 24 students with physical, sensory, mental, and learning disabilities using video conferences. With those experiences, we analyzed the effects of lockdown on their performance, how they cope with the difficulties during that period, and we also have analyzed the experiences, the differences among those students depending on their profiles. So we found that the lockdown provoked or caused both positive and negative effects on students with disabilities in the work. But most students experience a positive effect, especially in terms of increasing the available time for studying, and the flexibility and the support that the university offered to the students in general. They also discovered new ways of communication using social media, and thus opened a door for collaboration between peers. And this is very important in online education. The student also, most of the students also experience an increase of engagement and motivation for studying, and obviously a reduction of the psychological and emotional issues. And in the specific case of the final exams, they, for example, experienced the total elimination of the physical barriers that they faced before. About the negative effects, I have to say that it was a small number of students that experienced bad effects or negative effects during lockdown. One of the facts that influence, for example, that the student has say, for example, that it was bad or negative for them, for example, is the reduction of the social life, because they were used to interact with their friends, some of them. And but in the case of studies, for example, the management and the concentration issues, especially the management of time and the management of the place of study, because they were used to go to the libraries, to open spaces to do the studies. And those facts cause, for example, difficulties in emotional issues, for example, or those factors increase the anxiety and the stress for those students. Another students, for example, that lived with children at home and had to reconcile their job, their work, sorry, with their studies, also experienced negative effects during the lockdown. But what did those students did in order to cope with the COVID-19 difficulties? Some students, for example, developed new study techniques. For example, getting assistance for computer application, or some of them, for example, created new daily routines in order to be concentrate. Another students looked for support from the university, and the university obviously offered flexibility in time, but also through the academic advisor suggested a reduction of the workload during that semester, and so the students delay some courses for the coming semesters. And finally, there were a small amount of students that looked for support from psychiatric or psychologists, and they had, for example, medications and therapy in order to overcome all the problems related to the situation. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences among the profiles of the students, about among the type of disability and their academic trajectory. Overall, all the students or most students experience positive effects. For example, they felt, for example, that the time for studying was higher than before, and so they, for example, experienced an increase of dedication, of engagement, motivation, and concentration. However, for students with disabilities, that experience was so different, because, for example, the stress and the anxiety during that period increased on those students. And also the reduction of the cognitive functions, such as, for example, the memory and the concentration and attentiveness, and in that specific case of students with learning disabilities. According to the academic trajectory, the first year intermediate students, for example, experience positive effects, and also the senior student in general. But for the students who were in the final days of the degree, they, for example, faced barriers for carrying out their practicums of their final projects due to the pandemic. And the most important thing of my presentation is what we have learned from those experiences. And taking into account the experiences of the students, we can say that the online higher education, well organized, could support the student to overcome almost every accessibility barrier. But it's also very important to take into account the flexibility in different dimensions. For example, not only in time, not only in place of study, but also in the pace of work for students, because maybe some of them works slower than the rest, or some of them, for example, have a crisis or emergencies, for example, and so it's very important to promote the flexibility in all the teaching and the assessment processes. The online education also demands an increase of support for students with disabilities, but as a quality support and focused on pedagogical, psycho-emotional, and technological support. And finally, our study showed that, for example, the promotion of the online communication among all the stakeholders is essential in order to improve the sources of the students with disabilities, or in order to improve their inclusion in an online environment. And then the new thing that emerged from the pandemic is the adoption of the online assessment. And it was very positive for students with disability because it reduces the psycho-emotional issues and also the physical barriers for most students with disabilities. And what are the challenges that online universities have now in order to make the learning the online learning environments more accessible for most students, or for make them more inclusive? And we have posed, taking into account the student perceptions, two facts. The first is related to the universalization of the learning environments in order to promote the participation of all the students, of every student. And the second is related to the application of the principles of the universal design for learning and the universal instructional design. About the first, we think that there are some strategies that the universities can take into account. For example, the creation of a support community in which all the stakeholders, students, support services, instructors, and academic advisors are involved in order to improve the inclusion of every student, not even if they don't have a disability. The promotion of online communication is very, very important in those environments, in those educational processes, and is important to promote the interaction both in synchronous and asynchronous ways. And also the personalized support for students with disabilities is very, very important in order to support them to follow their studies. And finally, it's very important for the universities to train the teaching staff, because they have to be aware of the needs of students with disabilities, but also about the importance of designing inclusive courses, or accessible courses for all the students. About the universal design for learning and universal design for instruction, maybe now the university has made an important effort in order to make the virtual campus accessible for everyone. But maybe the universities the online universities have to work in flexibility, especially in time for preparing the assessment processes, and also the flexibility for the pace, the place of study and the pace of work. Flexibility for accessing is also very important. And finally, is very important that those kind of support be applied in both in the learning processes, in the assessment processes. And this is all I can tell you about our study. Thank you very much for attending my presentation. And now, if you have any question, I'm going to try to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jose, and very much in line with the call by Lopna, also to not make special programs for the target group, but make more universal approaches and developing inclusive courses for all. Any comments or questions for Jose? Let me check. There are some questions here. Do you think educators are not used to online learning tend to over-assess students? So do you think educators that are not used to online learning tend to over-assess students? Is that question clear?
The first question is about the online assessment. It is important to highlight that the university uses two kinds of assessment. The first is related to the continuous assessment, in which the student prepare assignments during all the course, and this allow the student, for example, to learn on their own pace, for example, and to follow guidelines, for example, in order to reconcile the problems of their disability. And this is very important. And the other kind is the online assessment in the final test. And not all the courses have those kind of assessment, because some of them only applies the continuous assessment. But for students who have to attend a final assessment, the university offers accommodation in time, for example. And I'm not sure if maybe the assessment is important in every process. And the question here is not reduce some kind of processes such as assessment, if not, but making it accessible for everyone. I think this is the key.
Thanks. How was universal learning design impacting the workload for the design of the course? How do teachers receive this or perceive having the extra workload?
Obviously, that the universal design for learning is so important in the online universities, because it reduces, for example, the possibility of requesting accommodation for every time, for example. And in our university, for example, the fact of having, for example, adapted resources in the virtual campus reduces the possibility of the students request, for example, for another people or for another service kind of accommodation. Maybe the accommodation that the university offers are more related to the time, the flexibility of time. But about the benefits of the universal design for learning is that all the students, irrespective of their condition, can access the content. And about the assessment is the same, because if, for example, a test is accessible, the students they can follow, they can resolve the assessment. Maybe the workload is not the problem. but for example, the flexibilization of time and the accommodation and the access, presenting the resources, the final test in accessible ways.
Yeah, thanks. And on online assessment, I can inform you that ED2 is currently also working on a special interest group on online assessment. And by the end of the year, we also have an overview and after mapping all online assessment methods from some 15 universities in Europe and what works and what doesn't work. So that would be an interesting addition to also the result of this task force on diversity and inclusion. Any other questions at this point? I think really, yeah, the WOC is a bit of an exceptional university in the sense that they have a lot of expertise in having provision of online education as their core business, and this helps, of course, very much in the support of diversity and inclusion, for which many other universities can also learn from these models. And we're also very active in our task force, so we will have also good practices further from the work included in our report of this task force. If there aren't not any other questions, maybe it's interesting that we announced already, Stefan, the program for the coming Thursday. We there have very experienced researchers who are very active in the field of diversity and inclusion presenting. And I'm sure we will have the program on the screen soon.
Yeah, super on the screen now.
I don't see it, but
Oh.
maybe others can see it. I don't know. Maybe it's my Mac. No, others can't see it either.
Oh. I think it's my computer is being a bit slow.
Do you have document sharing or screen sharing?
Yeah, I'm screen sharing, but just bear with me for a minute. Stop. Come on. Hope you can see it now.
Yeah, now it's there. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so indeed we have Achilles, who has been active also in our task force diversity and inclusion on several topics, but we'll focus on Hellenic Open University support on diversity and how they facilitate inclusion. And then followed by UNED, biggest university in Europe with almost 200,000 students, and for the bigger part online, on the institutionalization of diversity and inclusion. And they have interesting approaches, policies and strategies in this field, and Tiberio will further elaborate on that also on Thursday afternoon. So I want to thank first of all the both speakers of today, and I realized well, now well, that was quite last minute when we were in contact this weekend, but very relevant and very nice presentation that you presented here. I was very pleased that you managed to join at such short notice. And thanks, Jose, also for your contribution there on the expertise within the WOC. And thank you all for attending this afternoon, and we hope to see you back, of course, coming Thursday at 2 o'clock. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.